Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 17 of the Day Begin podcast. I always want to start with thanking you for giving me your limited time. You have thousands of things you could be doing. And this is partly why I always try to keep my podcast short, usually between 10 to 20 minutes, and help share with you what is the energy of this week. What is the energy of this week? I'm taking lessons here from the Holy Zohar, which is a book the great Kabbalists wrote 2,000 years ago, which is taking lessons and secrets from the Old Testament and many other spiritual sources, which, by the way, I don't think we've addressed many times before, but Kabbalah is not a religion. Kabbalah is spirituality as it was originally intended by the great sages that came to this world. If you go to Abraham and ask him, are you Jewish? Are you Christian? Are you Muslim? He wouldn't even know what any of those words mean. If you went to Moses and asked him, are you Jewish? He wouldn't know what you're talking about. If you went to Jesus and asked him, are you Christian? He would look at you and say, what's Christian? All of the religions that were created and were meant to be created, the Creator wanted the religions and cultures and traditions to be there. They serve a spiritual purpose. Was never really the original source of why these great souls came to the world. All the souls I mentioned and other great souls I have not mentioned who lead great religions, when their soul came to this world, they had one mission: to bring a unique set of wisdom to help the people around them transform who they are, not try to transform other people, transform who they are to become one with the universal energy and light that we call the Creator. Everyone did it in a different way. Everyone had the divine wisdom of different physical tools to use in order to connect to that energy. We know different plants have energy. Different physical objects have energy. We know that we have chakras all over our body that different religions tap into in different ways in order to access consciousness, and all of it's divine. It's all divine. And there's not one that's better than the other. Every soul needs its path to connect to the Creator in its own way. But what Kabbalah does is it kind of takes all the systems and explains the original blueprint of what our soul looks like, why we came to this world, and what we must do collectively to transform to have the life we want. The light comes in, the darkness goes away. This is why amongst my following, I look at the demo on just my social media. It is every religious denomination, even atheists. Even the people who don't believe in spirituality, they resonate with the wisdom of Kabbalah. So my hope is that through this study and all the future studies, that we unite and we come together and we go back to the source of all things. I'll share with you a funny story. I was thinking if I should share this or not, but it has such a powerful message. I try not to ever be controversial. I'm very careful to say anything that might be even misconstrued. But I want you to hear the lesson in what I am saying here, and not to let this trigger you. And even if it does trigger you, it's okay to let it trigger you. There's a spiritual meaning behind that too. Not too often, but sometimes I get asked, why don't I address politics? Why don't I address or take a stand against certain wars, certain things that are happening in the Middle East? What do I believe in? What's my opinion? And the truth is, I don't really understand the question. And I always tell them that. Someone came to me and said, why don't you address what's happening in the Middle East? And I said, I don't understand the question. I said, what's not to understand? Address what's happening. Take a side. Say something in support of whatever. And I said, I don't really fully understand your question. I don't know what you're asking. It doesn't register in my brain. And it literally doesn't. I don't understand what he's trying to say. And he said, for example, can you say something about the hostages? Well, depending on when you hear this podcast, you could be hearing this podcast, in 2030. And you'll be like, well, what is that all about? Well, let's just say it's hostages. And I said, I don't understand your question. And I said, why don't you rephrase the question? He's like, how would you like me to rephrase the question? I said, obviously he's getting a little upset by this point. I said, this is how I want you to ask the question. I want you to ask me, David, what do I need to do to transform myself, to draw enough light into the world to help the hostages? That's a question I understand. So he looked at me and said, fine, I'll ask that question. He said, David, what do I need to do to transform who I am, to draw enough light into the world to help the hostages? I said, I've seen the way, and at this point I'm being very direct with him. Often I am not so direct, but when someone is open and asking, I will be direct. I said, I have seen your relationship with your wife. I've been in many different occasions where I watch the two of you interact. I notice that quite often you criticize your wife. You put her down consciously and unconsciously. And I see the pain in her face. And he said, so what's your point? I said, your wife feels like a hostage in your marriage because you are constantly criticizing her and breaking her vessel. I said, let's free that hostage first. And then the light that will be revealed from that will help all the other hostages around the world. I'm going to leave that story for a moment for everyone to digest, for myself to digest. I have learned before we take an opinion, before we take a stand, and I have no problem. In fact, I think it's, if you feel called to change the world in your way, you must do so. If you feel called to be an activist, a fundraiser, charitable, in fact, most of my friends are, and I love them and respect them for it. I feel called to bring Kabbalah to the world. I don't know anything else. I don't have opinions. I think opinions cause my energy to just go down. Every time I have an opinion or I get involved in something political, I just see my vibration just go right down. And I'm like, I don't want to feel this way. And if my vibration goes down, that means there's less miracles, there's less transformation, less positive messages I can give to you. And then we're all going through some form of chaos as a result. So it is important for me to steer clear from things that actually cause you to go loops and loops and loops anyways. Sometimes I like to have a nice conversation just to learn, but when it gets serious, then you know the vibration drops. So it is wonderful to feel called to do whatever you are meant to do in this world and have opinions and post about it if you may, and educate the world, and all of that is wonderful. But one thing we must make sure of: are we in our personal lives, behind closed doors, with our friends, with our family, with strangers, living up to what we are asking the world to do? And the reason is it's not a moral question. Who cares about morals? It is a question of efficacy. If I want people to feel my energy and listen to me and be inspired by me, people are smart. If they know you're going home and disrespecting your spouse or ignoring your kids or lazy in your job, you cannot get on a stage and talk about how to be successful. People will hear the words, but they will not feel the energy. Everything is energy. Everything is energy. And for me, and I'm sure you feel it too, I can hear a speaker and the words may not be even that great, but I know from the way he or she makes me feel that they are living that concept. And that's really what it's all about. So the more we can have our internal match our external, the more powerful we can be. If you want to free the hostages, make sure there aren't people in your life who feel hostage by your hostility, hostage by your opinions all the time, hostage by your judgment. Often, people who are so passionate about making a change on the outside can often be very judgmental to the closest people to them. And again, this is not to cast judgment on them. I just want to talk about practical ways we can all reveal miracles. If you want your mission to be accomplished, literally go to your friends and be like, hey, let me ask you a question. What do you see I need to change? Like, I'm trying to I'm trying to, I'm trying to help these impoverished children in this foreign country have access to food and water. And then your friend might tell you, yeah, but your wife told me she hasn't had time, quality time or intimacy from you in the last 2 years because you're so busy trying to save those children. I think you got some poverty at home. You have a soul at home who's not being nourished physically, emotionally, sexually. I know I'm being very direct here, but let's think about it for a moment. We might be busy trying to help our customers, help people that are strangers, but we're not nourishing the people closest to us. So what are we doing? I remember I had a student once in New York. He was a top broker, residential broker. Always had a problem with his wife. They were always fighting. And I said to him, what's the issue? She's this and she's that and all these things. And then I went to her. I said, what's the issue? She said, I just don't feel like I'm number one in his life. I said, what do you feel? She's like, I feel his career is number one. I said, okay. I went to him and I said to him, who's your number one client? He said, it's this woman. I said, why is she your number one client? He said, well, she recently gave me an exclusive on her home to sell. And it's $50 million. It's a $50 million home. It's not easy to get an exclusive, to be the exclusive broker on a $50 million home. I said, okay. I said, what's her name? He gave a name. Let's call the name Cheryl. I said, if Cheryl called you at 2 a.m. after you had an exhausting day, what would you do? He said, I would pick up. I said, and how would you talk to her? And he said, well, I would say, Cheryl, is everything okay? What's going on? And Cheryl said, I just need 30 minutes to talk. I had a tough day. What would you do? He said, I would get up. I would say, give me 1 minute. Let me wash my face. Let me turn on the lights and I'm here for you. And I said, but you're exhausted all day. And you need your sleep. You would actually just get up and hold space for Cheryl? I was like, of course I would. I said, so why wouldn't you do that with your wife? You believe that Cheryl is more valuable than your wife. And that's fine, but you need to know something. Cheryl and every other Cheryl after her is going to feel that you are a fraud, that your insides don't match your outsides. So eventually the whole thing falls apart. When our insides, when the things that are happening that no one is looking, is more powerful than what's happening on the outside grows. The outside becomes viral. Things spread. Amazing things happen. Amazing things happen. And so the lesson for all of us is the negative side, what the negative side tries to do is get us to be passionate about all that we do on the outside and to be flippant about what needs to happen on the inside. You want the hostages to be released? Who are you holding hostage in your life? You want this war to end in some place? Do you realize that you've been going to war with your brother over some stupid nonsense that happened 6 years ago and neither of you are apologizing and both of you are being a victim about it? Do you realize that you have issues with your mom or your dad that no one's talking about? You are at war with them. You are at war with them. You don't like certain political policy. You don't like the crime situation. You don't like the tax situation. Why don't you like the taxes? The government's taking too much money from me, taking too much energy from me. I said, are there people you are stealing energy from? Are you taxing people? If I asked 100 people that you interacted with in the last 2 weeks, how many of them would say that you took more energy from them than you gave them? You're taxing people all day long and you're upset that the government's taxing you? We can change anything in this physical world once we shift our consciousness to internal transformation. What is a mantra that we can use to make this shift? There was a lot to think about in this conversation, by the way. This is one of those that I probably would hear again. It could also be very triggering. I mean, that's okay. I think triggering is okay. Those of you who have seen me in live seminars, we have like a couple hundred people in the room, I get so excited when someone raises their hand and says, I think what you just said is a bunch of bullshit. It's actually a moment in time where I accept that. Okay, what I just said is a bunch of bullshit. Let's talk about it. Why are you upset? And then they say, well, I don't believe in this and this and this. I say, I understand. But why are you really upset? Why are you really upset? You're not upset about what I said. We're often upset about something else. But we have an outlet now to kind of be upset and get that anger out. What it came down to was she was just really upset because she had a bad day and she had a breakup and she felt rejected. So then she comes to class and we talk about, well, if you're going through a rejection, if you're going through this kind of pain, maybe there's a part of you that subconsciously wanted this relationship to end for whatever reason. And that triggered her. But it's not what I said that was upsetting her. It was the fact that she felt pain from early on in the day, and we have to acknowledge that. We have to acknowledge that. So every time we're triggered, let me tell you, it has nothing to do with the trigger. It has to do with some unresolved pain, anger, right? Sarcasm is really just masked anger and pain and sadness. It has to do with stuff that just we didn't deal with, and now it's coming out during the trigger. Don't be upset at the people around you. Just realize you're in pain. And now you have an opportunity to just feel this pain and acknowledge where it's coming from and look at it from that point of view. One of the mantras we can use is ask the Creator every day. When we wake up in the morning, I think it's the best time. Say, Creator, please help me prioritize my transformation of myself over the transformation of the world. I will do everything in my power to help people, to give value, to be the activist I need to be, to share the content I need to share. But please make sure that I am authentic by focusing on myself. Please make sure that I'm cleaning my house before I tell everyone else to clean theirs. Just find that balance. We're not saying don't do what you're doing. We're just saying add the element of authenticity to work on the things you need to work on. If you're not sure what it is, I promise you, the 10 closest people to you can see what it is, and you can ask them one by one.